The desert stretched for miles in every direction, a vast and empty wasteland of dried riverbeds, jagged cliffs, and sun-bleached bones. It was a place where the land itself decided who survived and who didn't. And it belonged to Miles Carter. He sat on his porch, boots propped against the wooden railing, sipping coffee as the morning sun painted the sky in streaks of red and gold. His land stretched for 600 acres, rolling hills of dirt and dust, the occasional yucca plant swaying in the hot breeze. Miles had chosen this place for a reason. No people, no noise, no trouble. But trouble had a way of finding men like him. Bear, his Belgian Malinois, lay at his feet, his ears twitching. The dog had sensed it first, something moving in the distance. Miles followed Bear's gaze toward the southern ridge, where a faint plume of dust rose into the air. Engines, not one, multiple. Miles took another sip of coffee, slow and measured, eyes narrowing. He had been seeing signs for weeks, discarded water bottles, tire tracks where there shouldn't be any, footprints leading across his property. Someone had been testing the boundaries, and now it looked like they were ready to push through. By the time the first truck rolled past the old fence line, Miles was already inside, watching through the scope of his Remington 700 sniper rifle. He had parked himself on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, hidden beneath an old tarp, rifle nestled in the dirt. The trucks kept coming, 3 in total, kicking up dust as they slowed near the dried riverbed. Men climbed out, their movements precise, disciplined. Not amateurs, these were smugglers. And they weren't just passing through. Miles watched as a man stepped forward, scanning the terrain through a pair of binoculars. He was tall, built like a soldier, his body wrapped in tattoos that told a story of violence and time served in the wrong places. He was the leader. The men fanned out, rifles slung over their shoulders, speaking in low Spanish murmurs. They weren't looking for anything. They weren't lost. They were marking territory. Miles breathed slow, controlled. Through his scope, he tracked the leader, watching as the man knelt near an old pile of rocks and pulled something from his pocket. A knife. The blade flashed in the sun as the man sliced a deep V into the wood of a nearby fence post. A mark, a message. Miles didn't need to get closer to know what it meant. This land is ours now. Miles pulled back from the scope and exhaled. His hands were steady. His pulse barely changed. He had seen men like this before, overseas, in places the government pretended didn't exist. They all thought they were untouchable, until they weren't. The trucks rolled out an hour later, leaving behind boot prints, tire marks, and a bad taste in Miles Carter's mouth. He didn't move from his position until the last sound of an engine faded into the horizon. Then, slowly, he stood. Bear trotted beside him as he walked toward the fence line, eyes scanning the dirt. The V the cartel had carved into the wood stood out like a scar on fresh skin. Miles ran his fingers over it, jaw tight. He could let this go. Could ignore it, call the sheriff, pretend like it wasn't his problem. But that wasn't who he was, and these men weren't going to stop. So he gave them a message of his own. With the back of his hunting knife, he carved a new symbol right beside the one they left. A simple X. The kind of mark you put over a dead man's name. By nightfall, the engines returned. Miles was waiting. He sat on his porch, rifle across his lap, a glass of whiskey in one hand. The moon hung high, casting a pale glow over the valley. The wind had died down. Everything was still. Then the headlights cut through the darkness. The cartel had come back. 4 trucks this time, twice the number of men. They weren't scouting anymore. They were moving in. Bear let out a low growl, his ears pinned back. Miles didn't tell him to hush. That was a warning worth listening to. The truck stopped just beyond the fence line, their doors swinging open. Armed men stepped out, dressed in black, rifles slung over their shoulders. The leader was back. Miles didn't stand, didn't move, just watched. The leader took a few steps forward, hands loose at his sides, casual, confident, like he had already won. "You the owner?" the man called, his Spanish accent thick. Miles took a slow sip of whiskey, then set the glass down. "Last I checked." The leader smirked. "Then we need to talk." Miles didn't answer. The leader stepped closer. "We like your land, Viejo. It's good land, quiet, perfect for business." Miles stayed silent. The leader's smirk widened. "We can pay you to look the other way." Another step. "Or we can make you." Miles let out a slow breath. "You should leave." The leader laughed. "And if we don't?" Miles finally stood, setting his whiskey aside. His rifle rested easy in his grip, not raised, but close enough. "If you don't," he said, voice calm, "I bury you here." The leader's smirk faded. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then, the man raised his hand. A signal. The men behind him moved, rifles lifted. Safety clicks. Bear snarled, muscles tensing. Miles moved first. The first shot exploded in the dark, tearing through the knee of the closest man. He dropped, screaming. The second shot took the next one between the eyes. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire lit up the night. Cartel soldiers scrambling for cover, returning fire blindly. Miles was already moving, rolling behind the porch column as rounds splintered the wood. Bear lunged, snapping at a man's throat, bringing him down in a flurry of teeth and snarls. Miles fired twice more, taking out another gunman trying to flank. The leader stumbled back toward his truck, shouting orders, but his men were already falling apart. This wasn't a raid anymore. This was a massacre. Within minutes, only 2 were left standing, the leader and one of his soldiers. Miles stepped forward, blood dripping from his knife, his rifle still warm. The remaining man dropped his gun and ran. The leader stood frozen. "You made your point, gringo," he growled, "but this isn't over." Miles raised his rifle. "Yeah," he muttered, "it is." The last shot rang out. The leader fell. The desert was silent again. Miles exhaled, stepping over the bodies. He walked toward the truck still idling, pulled the bodies out, then climbed behind the wheel. By morning, he dumped them back over the border, with a message, "Stay out." Or next time, he wouldn't be so nice. The bodies were gone by sunrise. Miles Carter had worked through the night, loading the dead men into their own trucks, driving them back to the border under the cover of darkness. He had dumped them just across the line, right at the base of an old cartel outpost, a silent message that needed no explanation. By the time the first rays of light stretched across the desert, Miles was back home, sitting on his porch, sipping a fresh cup of coffee. His land was quiet again, but that peace wasn't going to last. He knew the rules of this game. He had played it before, overseas, in places the government pretended didn't exist. Men like the Valdez Cartel didn't just take losses and move on. They retaliated, hard. Bear sat beside him, ears twitching at the distant hum of the wind through the dry brush. The dog had sensed it before, the trouble, the tension, the weight of something coming. He could feel it now, the same way Miles did. They weren't done with him, and when they came back, they'd bring everything they had. Miles took another slow sip of coffee. That was fine. He had been waiting for something like this for a long, long time. By mid-morning, Miles was out on the property, preparing for war. The sun burned high in the sky, casting long shadows over the hills, but he moved like a machine, setting up his defenses with practiced precision. He checked the tripwires he had placed near the dry riverbed, making sure they were hidden beneath the loose sand. He reinforced the high ground near the ridges, setting up extra ammunition caches and water supplies. Every inch of this land was familiar to him, mapped in his mind like a battlefield. He knew every weak spot, every place an enemy might try to push through. He used that knowledge to turn them into kill zones. The last thing he did was take a long, slow walk to the fence line, where the cartel had left their mark. The carved V was still there, but now it was crossed out with his own deep X. Miles ran a calloused hand over the wood, his jaw tightening. He had drawn the line. Now, it was up to them whether they wanted to cross it again. The first warning came that evening. A single truck rolling up the dirt road just before sundown. Not a convoy, not a show of force. Just a lone vehicle moving slow, deliberate, like it had nothing to fear. Miles stood on his porch, watching as the dust curled behind it, waiting. He didn't reach for his rifle, not yet. He just let the truck come, his eyes narrowing as it finally came to a stop near the main gate. The driver stepped out first, an older man, dressed sharp but casual, the kind of effortless confidence that came with power. He wasn't carrying a weapon, but the way he moved made it clear he didn't need one. The second man who stepped out was younger, maybe mid-30s, dressed in tactical gear, his eyes cold and unreadable. A bodyguard, a killer. Miles didn't move, didn't speak. He just let them come. The older man stopped a few yards from the porch, slipping his hands into his pockets. His face was calm, unreadable. "You made quite a mess," he said in Spanish. Miles took a slow sip of coffee. "Had some uninvited guests." The man smiled faintly, nodding. "Yes, I heard. And now you're on my radar, Senor Carter." Miles didn't blink. "That's supposed to scare me?" The man chuckled, shaking his head. No, just letting you know how things are. You have something I want. Your land, the routes through it." He gestured toward the horizon. "This land is perfect, quiet, isolated. You're sitting on money." Miles tilted his head slightly. "And I'm guessing you'd rather buy it than bury more men out here?" The older man sighed, as if he genuinely regretted where this conversation was heading. "Senor Carter, I will be honest with you. We respect men like you, soldiers, warriors. But war is bad for business. I'd rather we come to an agreement." Miles exhaled slowly, setting his coffee down on the porch railing. "And if I say no?" The man's smile faded. He nodded to the bodyguard beside him, who stepped forward, holding out a thick envelope. "Take the money, Senor Carter. Enough to buy another ranch somewhere else, somewhere peaceful." Miles looked at the envelope, but didn't reach for it. Instead, he locked eyes with the cartel man. "There's already peace here," he said. The man sighed, shaking his head. "You know what happens next then?" Miles nodded. "Yeah." The cartel boss turned, walking back to the truck. "You're a dead man, viejo." Miles smirked. "Not today." The bodyguard hesitated a second longer, his eyes flickering to the rifle resting against the porch. He didn't say anything, but Miles saw the look in his eyes. Respect. Then they got back in the truck and drove away. Miles didn't watch them go. He just picked up his rifle, turned back toward the land, and let the wind carry away their words. They would be back, and when they came, he would be waiting. The attack came at 3 a.m. Miles had barely slept, his body trained from years of war to rest light, to wake at the first sound out of place. Bear had been restless all night, pacing near the door, ears twitching. Then, at exactly 2:57 a.m., the dog froze. Miles opened his eyes. The silence was thick, pressing down on the land. Then, in the distance, the low rumble of engines. He grabbed his rifle, slipped on his boots, and moved out the back, disappearing into the darkness. By the time the first truck rolled through the valley, he was already in position. Through the scope, he saw 3 vehicles, blacked out, no headlights. He counted 12 men, moving in coordinated silence. No one spoke. These weren't low-level smugglers. These were killers. Miles exhaled slowly, lined up his first shot, and squeezed the trigger. The first man dropped instantly, his body collapsing against the truck's door. Chaos erupted. The others ducked, scrambling for cover, shouting in Spanish. Miles moved fast, relocating before they could track the shot. He saw one of them trying to flank left. Bad choice. Another round snapped through the silence. The man dropped face first into the dirt. 2 down, 10 left. The cartel opened fire, spraying the ridge with automatic gunfire, bullets kicking up dirt and rock. Miles rolled down the slope, slipping into the shadows. They were shooting at nothing, firing blind. They had no idea where he was. That was the problem with fighting a sniper. You don't find him, he finds you, and tonight he was hunting. The war for Miles Carter's land had begun, and by morning, only one side would be standing. Darkness swallowed the desert, broken only by the flicker of firelight from the smoldering truck near the ridge. Miles Carter moved like a ghost, weaving through the brush, his rifle held close to his chest. The cartel had come heavy. 3 vehicles, a dozen men, all armed to the teeth, but they weren't trained for this kind of fight. They were used to overwhelming force, to fear, to brute strength. But out here, on his land, fear belonged to them. Miles lay flat against the rocks, peering through his scope. The cartel soldiers were scrambling, using their headlights to cut through the darkness, scanning the terrain for him. Big mistake. Light worked both ways. Through his thermal optic, they lit up like targets at a shooting range. A man near the first truck stood shouting orders in rapid Spanish. His stance was rigid, his hands cutting through the air as he pointed to the ridge. He was directing his men, keeping them focused. A leader. Miles exhaled, steady, squeezed the trigger. The man's head snapped back, his body crumpling before the words had even finished leaving his lips. The others hesitated for a half second before gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes lighting up the valley as they fired blindly into the hills. Miles was already gone, slipping deeper into the brush. The key to sniping wasn't just marksmanship, it was movement. A sniper who stayed still was a dead sniper. He crawled low, feeling the grit of sand and rock beneath his forearms, making his way toward his next position. A second later, bullets chewed into the ground where he'd just been, kicking up dust and stone. They had a vague idea of where he was now, but that was fine. He wasn't going to be there much longer. A voice barked orders. The cartel was spreading out, trying to surround him. Miles grinned. Let them try. The desert could be a cruel thing to the unprepared. Miles knew how to use it. The cartel soldiers, for all their firepower, weren't moving smart. They were rushing forward in short bursts, sweeping their rifles across the darkness, expecting him to be an easy target. But the difference between them and Miles Carter? They hunted with numbers. He hunted with patience. A shadow moved between the bushes below. Miles adjusted his aim, let his breath still, and squeezed the trigger. A sharp cry, followed by a thump. Another one down. The others shouted, shifting position. But their reaction was sloppy, panicked. They didn't know where the shot had come from. Miles rolled to his right, creeping toward the dry riverbed, where he had stashed extra ammunition. A few more shots cracked through the night, kicking up dust near his feet. They were guessing now? He reached his supply cache, quickly loading another magazine, and scanned the area again. They were moving up the hill in pairs, leapfrogging for cover. Smarter, more organized. These weren't just street-level smugglers. Someone had brought trained men this time. Good. He was getting tired of fighting amateurs. The radio on his belt crackled. Miles Carter. The voice was deep, slow, the kind of voice that didn't get rattled, the kind that had given orders in places like this before. Miles didn't respond. The voice chuckled. You're a hard man to kill. Miles kept his breathing slow, creeping along the ridge, keeping his rifle steady. But you know how this ends, the voice continued. You're one man, we have numbers, you can't fight forever. Miles smirked. I don't have to fight forever, just longer than you. Silence. Then, you killed my brother. That explained the new men, the heavier firepower, the personal grudge. Miles hadn't known who the leader of the first group was, didn't care. But now, this was about revenge. The radio crackled again. You know what they say about men like you? Miles stayed quiet. They don't die well. The signal cut out. Miles exhaled, pressing his back against the rock. They were closing in. He had maybe 3-4 minutes before they'd reach his position. He needed to even the odds. The cartel was smart enough to know he was out here, but they weren't smart enough to realize he had been preparing for this. Miles had spent years fortifying this land, mapping every pass, every bottleneck, every vantage point. He had traps laid out in the desert, buried beneath loose dirt, waiting for a reason to be triggered. Tonight, he had a damn good reason. He reached into his vest, pulling the small detonator from his pocket. The men had just entered the canyon, their shadows stretching long under the moonlight. They thought they had him pinned. He pressed the button. The ground erupted. The explosion sent a fireball roaring through the canyon, the force of it knocking 2 men clean off their feet. The others screamed, diving for cover, as flames licked up the sides of the rock. Miles swung his rifle into position and fired. 1, 2, 3. The remaining cartel soldiers scrambled, some running, others trying to return fire, but it was too late. The ambush had worked. Now, all that was left was the boss. The desert was quiet again, except for the crackle of small fires burning through the scrub. The smell of burning fuel, scorched metal, and blood hung heavy in the air. Miles moved slowly, methodically, stepping over the bodies, rifle still at the ready. He could hear ragged breathing ahead, near the overturned truck. He found him there, wounded but alive, clutching his side where shrapnel had torn through his ribs. The cartel leader looked up, eyes burning with hatred, blood spilling from the corner of his mouth. You think this ends it? He hissed. You think? Miles shot him in the leg. The man screamed, writhing in the dirt. You're right, Miles said, reloading. This doesn't end it. The man gasped for air, his face twisted in pain. The cartel will keep coming. Miles crouched beside him, eyes cold. Then I'll keep killing them. He raised his rifle. A gunshot snapped through the night. The cartel boss jerked, eyes wide. Blood trickled down his forehead. Miles blinked. That shot hadn't come from him. He turned, scanning the darkness, rifle up. The desert wasn't empty anymore. Two figures stood just beyond the firelight, weapons at their sides. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and an old military jacket, lowered her rifle. She smirked. "Took you long enough, Carter." Miles didn't lower his weapon. "Who the hell are you?" The other figure, a stocky man with a beard and an ex-army patch on his vest, stepped forward. "We've been watching this cartel for a while. Seems like you've been doing our job for us." Miles frowned. "Your job?" The woman nodded toward the dead cartel boss. "He wasn't the only one coming for you. His boss is still out there, and he just put a bounty on your head." Miles exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Great." The woman offered a dry smile. "You're gonna need some help." Miles glanced at the burning wreckage, at the bodies in the sand. He should have felt relief. Instead, all he felt was the next fight coming. He sighed. "Yeah," he muttered. "I figured." Smoke curled into the night sky, the acrid stench of burning oil mixing with the sharp, coppery scent of blood. The desert was still now, bodies strewn across the valley floor, the cartel soldiers lying where they'd fallen. The firelight cast flickering shadows over the carnage, illuminating the wreckage of trucks, shattered rifles, and the lifeless eyes of men who had thought they were invincible. Miles Carter stood among them, his rifle resting loosely in his hands. He should have felt something, satisfaction, relief, but all he felt was the weight of what came next. Because this wasn't over. He could still hear the last words of the dying cartel leader echoing in his mind. The cartel will keep coming. And now there were two strangers standing in front of him, their presence as unexpected as the gunshot that had taken out the cartel boss before Miles could finish the job himself. The woman, the one who had fired the shot, stepped forward. She had the stance of someone who had spent years in combat, shoulders squared, movements precise. Her sharp blue eyes studied Miles with something between respect and caution. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and the old military jacket she wore had seen more battle than most soldiers ever would. Beside her, the stocky man with the ex-army patch and a beard streaked with gray nodded toward the corpses. "Hell of a mess you made here, Carter." Miles shifted his rifle, keeping his finger close to the trigger. He wasn't in the mood for conversation. "Who the hell are you?" The woman smirked. "You're not as hard to find as you think. We've been tracking this cartel for a while now. Seems like you've been doing our job for us." Miles's jaw tightened. "And what job is that?" She reached into her vest and pulled out a worn, laminated badge, holding it just long enough for him to get a good look. DHS Task Force. "We specialize in cartel interdiction. Name's Harper. This is Cole." Miles barely glanced at it. "And?" Harper's smirk faded, replaced with something dead serious. "And Valdez just put a bounty on your head. A big one." Miles exhaled slowly. He should have expected it. Killing off a cartel boss wasn't something that went unanswered, and now Valdez, the real leader, the man pulling the strings, had made it personal. "How big?" Miles asked. Cole adjusted his rifle. "Big enough that every mercenary, sicario, and bounty hunter south of the border is going to be looking for you." Miles glanced out at the desert, at the distant ridgeline, where headlights could appear at any moment. "Let 'em come." Harper crossed her arms. "That's cute, but you won't survive this alone." Miles raised an eyebrow. "I just took down a whole kill squad by myself." Cole let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah, and that was the opening act. Valdez isn't going to send another dozen men. He's going to send an army." Miles rolled his shoulders. He had figured as much. Valdez wasn't just some cartel thug. He ran an empire, and he had the resources to wage war on one man, if that's what it took. Harper studied him for a long moment, then exhaled. "Look, you don't have to like us, but you need us. We've got intel, weapons, and the resources to actually take this bastard down. You help us get Valdez, and we make sure you stay alive." Miles scoffed. "And what if I say no?" Harper shrugged. "Then you die. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon." Miles was quiet for a long moment. He didn't trust the government. He had spent too many years doing their dirty work, cleaning up their messes. But Valdez was coming. That much was certain, and if he wanted to stop this, to end it for good, he needed to take the fight to the source. His grip on his rifle tightened. "Fine, But if you slow me down, you're on your own." Harper smirked again. "I was about to say the same thing to you." Cole grinned. "Well, ain't this gonna be fun?" Miles didn't smile. He just looked at the bodies one last time, then turned toward his truck. "Let's get to work." By the time the sun crested over the horizon, Miles had packed what he needed: extra ammo, explosives, rations. He loaded up the bed of his truck with everything he would need for war. Harper and Cole were ready too. They had a blacked-out SUV loaded with tactical gear, comms equipment, and enough firepower to level a city block. The plan was simple: find Valdez. End him. Harper had intel on his operations: safe houses, routes, supply chains. The cartel ran like a machine, and if you took out the right parts, it all came crashing down. But they wouldn't have time to be methodical. Not now. Not with the bounty on Miles's head. They had to move fast. Cole slammed the SUV's door shut and looked over at Miles. "You sure you're ready for this?" Miles climbed into the driver's seat of his truck, resting his rifle on the passenger seat. "I've been ready for a long time." Harper nodded. "Then let's go kill a king." They had barely made it 20 miles when the first pursuers showed up. The dust kicked up behind them as a convoy of black SUVs appeared on the horizon, moving fast, gaining ground. Miles checked the rearview mirror. Looks like Valdez's boys didn't waste time. Harper pulled out her rifle, checking the chamber. "Let's make them regret it." Cole grinned, slamming a fresh magazine into his rifle. "About damn time." Miles tightened his grip on the wheel. "Hold on." The chase was on. Bullets tore through the air, shattering the rear windshield of the SUV, kicking up dirt as tires screeched against the desert road. Miles gunned the engine, weaving through the rough terrain, trying to put distance between them and the pursuers. But these weren't rookie sicarios. They were trained, fast, relentless. Harper leaned out the window, rifle braced against the frame. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and the lead vehicle veered off the road, flipping end over end in a cloud of dust and fire. But the others kept coming. Cole grabbed a grenade launcher from the back seat. "Hope y'all like fireworks!" He fired. The second SUV erupted into flames, the explosion sending it skidding sideways into a ditch. But the last truck was still there, and it was gaining fast. Miles clenched his jaw. "Time to end this." He yanked the wheel hard, sending the truck into a fishtail. The cartel vehicle swerved to match, right into the spike strip Miles had planted the day before. The tires shredded, the truck flipped, and the desert swallowed the wreckage. Harper let out a breath, shaking her head. "Jesus," Cole chuckled. "Hell of a way to start the morning." Miles barely reacted. He just stared ahead at the open road. "This is only the beginning," he said. Valdez was still out there, and Miles Carter was going to end him, for good. The sun had barely broken the horizon when Miles Carter pressed the accelerator, sending the truck flying across the uneven desert terrain. The cartel convoy was dead behind them, but Valdez wasn't going to stop sending more men. He had money, power, and enough corrupt cops on his payroll to make life difficult. Miles knew this was just the beginning. If they wanted to stop him, they had to cut the head off the snake. Dust curled into the air behind them, and Harper leaned out of the SUV's passenger window, eyes scanning the rear. "We need to ditch the highway," she called over the wind. "If they're tracking us, it won't take long before reinforcements show up." Cole, gripping the rifle across his lap, exhaled. "How much further to the safe house?" "Another hour," Harper said. "If we don't hit trouble before then?" Miles didn't bother responding. He'd already taken a detour onto a side trail, kicking up rocks as the truck jostled violently over the uneven ground. Bear, laying across the back seat, huffed in annoyance but stayed still. Miles had taken the dog into firefights before. He knew how to keep his cool. Harper's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it before muttering a curse. "They already know we're coming. We lost the tail, but they put out a bounty alert. Every sicario between here and the border is going to be looking for us." Miles kept his eyes on the road. "Then we don't give them a chance to find us first." Cole chuckled, shaking his head. "Man, I was hoping for a little rest before the next shootout." "Not today," Miles said flatly. They rode in silence for another 20 minutes, the only sounds being the tires crunching over loose gravel and the distant call of vultures circling the wreckage behind them. Harper studied a map on her tablet, pointing toward an old abandoned town just ahead. "Nuevo Santa Rosa," used to be a mining town. Now it's nothing but empty buildings, she said. We cut through there. We can lose any spotters before we get to the safe house. Miles nodded, adjusting course. He had passed through that town a few times over the years, never stopping longer than needed. It was one of those places the world had forgotten, just sun-bleached ruins and bad memories. The first sign of trouble came when they hit the outskirts. Miles slowed the truck, eyes scanning the rooftops of the skeletal buildings that once made up the town. Windows were shattered, rusted cars sat lifeless in the street, and a faded gas station sign creaked against the wind. Harper tensed in the passenger seat. I don't like this. Cole gripped his rifle tighter. Feels like a setup. Miles didn't say anything. He just felt it. Something was wrong. Bear let out a low growl from the back seat. Then came the first gunshot. The windshield cracked as a bullet ripped through the glass, missing Miles's head by inches. He slammed the gas pedal, but the moment he did, the road ahead exploded in a wall of fire. They were boxed in. More gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes sparking from the rooftops. Shadows moved between buildings, cartel ambushers waiting for them. Miles yanked the wheel, spinning the truck into a tight turn just as a second blast shook the ground. The SUV behind them barely missed the wreckage before skidding into cover. Out! Now! Harper shouted. Miles grabbed his rifle and kicked open the door, dropping low behind an abandoned truck as bullets peppered the metal. Cole fired off a burst toward the gas station, forcing one of the gunmen back behind cover. Harper was already moving, darting across the street, laying down suppressing fire with her rifle. Miles scanned the rooftops through his scope, spotting a shooter perched on a second-floor balcony. He lined up the shot, exhaled, and pulled the trigger. The man crumpled instantly, his rifle slipping from his hands. Bear stayed close, snarling as another cartel enforcer tried flanking around the back of the SUV. Miles didn't give him the chance. One shot to the chest, another to the head. More men emerged from the buildings, firing wildly, trying to pin them down. The air was thick with dust and gunpowder, the scent of burning fuel mixing with the heat of the desert. Cole gritted his teeth. We need to get the hell out of here. Miles adjusted his rifle and picked off another target. We're not leaving until these bastards are in the ground. Harper tossed a grenade over a crumbling wall, the explosion shattering windows and sending bodies flying. Fine by me, she muttered. The remaining cartel soldiers hesitated. They thought this was going to be an easy ambush. They were wrong. One of the men tried retreating toward a waiting truck, but Miles dropped him before he could reach the door. Another ran into the gas station, but Harper was already moving, clearing the building with precise shots. Cole took out the last runner with a shotgun blast that sent him tumbling into the dirt. Silence. Only the crackling of the nearby flames and the distant sound of a radio fizzing with static remained. Miles reloaded, scanning the rooftops one last time before lowering his rifle. Harper kicked over one of the bodies, checking for intel. These weren't just bounty hunters. These guys were well trained. Valdez isn't playing games anymore. Miles holstered his weapon. Neither am I. Cole shook his head, still catching his breath. What's next? Miles looked toward the road leading out of town, toward the safe house that suddenly didn't feel so safe anymore. We finish this, he said. We take the fight to Valdez. Harper wiped sweat from her brow, nodding. Then we hit him where it hurts. Miles glanced at the bodies littering the street, then back at the burning wreckage. You don't send warnings to men like Valdez, he said. You send graves. They loaded back into the vehicles, engines growling as they pulled away from the town. Miles checked his rearview mirror one last time, watching as Nuevo Santa Rosa faded behind them. Valdez had sent his men. Now it was Miles's turn. And the next time he pulled the trigger, it wouldn't be on cartel soldiers. It would be on the king himself. The road stretched before them, cracked asphalt and sand-blasted signs marking a path that led deeper into cartel territory. Miles Carter kept one hand on the wheel, his rifle resting against the passenger seat. The adrenaline from the ambush had burned off, leaving behind that familiar quiet focus, the same feeling he used to get before a mission, the kind that told him the real fight was still ahead. Harper sat beside him, reloading her rifle with steady hands. She had taken a round to the vest during the firefight, and though the Kevlar had done its job, the impact had left her bruised and sore. She hadn't complained, just gritted her teeth and kept moving. She was solid, sharp, the kind of operative who had seen enough war to know that pain was secondary to survival. Cole sat in the back seat, flipping through a tablet linked to their satellite feed. He had a half-smoked cigar between his fingers, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. "Valdez knows we're coming," he muttered. "Word's spreading fast. We've taken out 2 of his best crews in the last 24 hours. He's running out of men, but that just makes him more dangerous." Miles glanced at the mirror, watching the road behind them disappear into the dust. "How long until we reach the compound?" Harper checked her watch. 2 hours, maybe less if we push it. Miles pressed the accelerator, the truck's engine growling as they picked up speed. There was no turning back now. The safe house was a ghost town, an old cattle ranch that had been abandoned years ago, now serving as a temporary staging ground. It was a good spot, isolated, defensible, with multiple exit routes. They pulled in just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty fields. Miles killed the engine and stepped out, scanning the perimeter. Harper and Cole followed, weapons ready, moving in sync like they had done this 1,000 times before. The place was still, silent except for the distant howl of coyotes. Bear trotted ahead, sniffing the ground, ears twitching. If there was something out here, he'd find it. Harper moved toward the main house, testing the door before nodding. Clear. Inside, dust covered the wooden floors, the scent of old hay and rusted metal lingering in the air. Miles checked the power. Nothing. They'd have to rely on battery lanterns and their own instincts. Cole dropped his bag on the table and pulled out a satellite phone. "I got a contact feeding me intel from inside Valdez's operation. Word is, he's holed up in a compound outside of Juarez. High walls, security on every entrance, and more firepower than we've seen so far." Miles leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "So, we need to draw him out." Harper smirked. "That's the plan. Hit him where it hurts. Make him desperate." Cole chuckled. "I like desperate men. They make mistakes." Miles nodded, his mind already working through the angles. "We take out his supply chain first. No drugs, no money, no power. He'll come looking for us, and when he does..." Harper finished his thought. "We put him down." The first target was a convoy moving through the borderlands, a shipment of guns and drugs heading north. Miles had set up an ambush along a desolate stretch of highway, positioning himself on a ridge overlooking the road. Harper and Cole were waiting farther down, ready to cut off any escape routes. Through the scope of his rifle, Miles watched the convoy approach. 3 trucks, 2 SUVs leading the way. The cartel had learned from their last mistakes. These weren't just drug mules. These were trained gunmen, moving in tight formation, scanning the terrain. Didn't matter. They had no idea who was watching them. Miles exhaled slow, steady. The first shot shattered the windshield of the lead SUV, the driver slumping forward as the vehicle swerved, tires screaming against the pavement. The second shot took out a gunner in the truck bed, his body tumbling over the side. Then the chaos started. The convoy screeched to a halt, men pouring out, guns raised, scanning the ridgeline. But Miles was already moving, shifting position before they could pinpoint him. Harper and Cole opened fire from the other side of the road, bullets tearing through the cartel's ranks. The smugglers scrambled for cover, but there was nowhere to go. One by one, they fell. By the time the last shot echoed across the desert, the convoy was nothing but burning wreckage and bodies. Miles reloaded, standing over the bodies, scanning their gear. "Valdez is gonna feel this." Harper wiped sweat from her brow. "Yeah, but now he knows it's personal." Miles smirked. "Good." They hit 2 more supply lines over the next 24 hours, a cartel stash house and a shipment of cash moving across the border. Each time, they left behind a message. No warnings, no survivors, just destruction. By the time Valdez got the news, his operation was crumbling. And then, the phone rang. Miles picked it up, letting the silence stretch before speaking. "Go ahead." Valdez's voice was different this time, less controlled, more frustrated. "You think you're untouchable?" Miles chuckled. "No, I just think you're running out of men." Valdez exhaled sharply. "You want me, Carter? Fine, meet me in Juarez, no more games." Miles grinned. "Looking forward to it." The line went dead. Harper leaned against the table. "He's luring you into a trap." Miles holstered his pistol. "Yeah." Cole cracked his knuckles. "So what's the plan?" Miles grabbed his rifle, slinging it over his shoulder. We walk in, we kill him, and we burn his whole operation to the ground. Harper nodded. Simple, I like it. Cole grinned. Let's go kill a cartel boss. The sun had set, and the road to Juarez lay ahead. The final fight was coming. And by morning, Valdez would be dead. The road to Juarez was long and empty, stretching through the desert like a scar carved into the earth. Miles Carter sat behind the wheel of his truck, hands steady on the wheel, his mind already locked into combat mode. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the sky was a deep, inky black. No streetlights, no signs of civilization, just miles of nothingness. Harper sat in the passenger seat, her rifle resting across her lap, checking the chamber with methodical precision. She had barely said a word since Valdez's call, her mind no doubt running through the dozen different ways this could go wrong. Cole was in the back, flipping through his tablet, checking the satellite images one last time. Valdez ain't playing around, he muttered, eyes fixed on the screen. His compound is locked down tight. Guard towers, reinforced gates, security patrols every 20 minutes. This isn't just some drug den, it's a damn fortress. Miles didn't take his eyes off the road. Good, makes it easier. Harper shot him a look. Easier? If they're all in one place, Miles said, I don't have to go looking for them. The truck rumbled over the cracked pavement, closing the distance toward enemy territory. There were no good ways into Juarez, not for men like them. Valdez controlled half the police force, and the men who weren't on his payroll were too scared to do anything about him. If things went sideways, there wouldn't be a backup team coming to pull them out. This was a one-way mission. Harper exhaled. We're walking into a trap. You know that, right? Miles smirked. Of course. Cole chuckled from the back seat. Well, at least he's honest about it. The city of Juarez was a beast of neon and shadow, sprawling along the border like a predator watching its prey. The streets were alive, even at this hour. Vendors still selling food on the sidewalks, cars honking, music blaring from distant clubs. But beneath the surface, the fear was there. Everyone knew who owned this place, and tonight, that man was waiting for them. Miles drove slow, weaving through the streets, watching everything. The people walking too fast, heads down. The pairs of men leaning against buildings, not talking, just watching. A white sedan that had been behind them for too long. They've clocked us, Harper murmured, keeping her eyes on the mirror. Miles nodded. They've been following us since we crossed the bridge. Cole sat up, his grip tightening on his rifle. How long before they make a move? Miles made a left turn down a narrower street, the buildings pressing in closer. Not long. As if on cue, the sedan's engine revved, the headlights flaring bright. The car shot forward, racing toward their bumper. Harper barely had time to curse before Miles yanked the wheel hard, sending the truck into a sharp turn. Tires screamed against the pavement as the sedan overshot, skidding into the intersection. A second car appeared from the alley ahead, cutting them off. Miles hit the brakes. 4 men piled out, weapons drawn. Harper was already moving, flipping open the glove box and pulling out a short-barreled shotgun. We're doing this now? Cole grinned, cracking his neck. Guess so. Miles didn't wait. He kicked open the driver's door and fired 2 shots before his boots even hit the pavement. The first gunman dropped instantly, his body folding as a hole opened up in his chest. Harper was next, rolling out the passenger side, bringing up her shotgun and blasting a second man clean off his feet. Cole took care of the third, firing a burst from his rifle that sent the body spinning into the side of the car. The last one panicked, turning to run. Miles caught him by the back of his jacket, slammed him against the truck, and pressed the barrel of his pistol against his jaw. Where's Valdez? The man was shaking, his breath ragged. He's at the compound. He's waiting for you. Miles held his gaze. How many men? The gunman hesitated. Miles pressed the barrel harder against his skin. Last chance. The man swallowed. 30, maybe 40. He knows you're coming. Miles nodded once. Good. Then he pulled the trigger. The body slumped to the ground. Harper wiped blood off her cheek with the back of her hand. That was loud! Miles holstered his gun. Doesn't matter. Cole checked his watch. We're running out of time. Miles grabbed the keys from one of the dead men, tossing them to Harper. New plan, we take their car, drive straight to Valdez. Harper caught the keys, raising an eyebrow. Straight through the front door? Miles cracked his knuckles. Why not? He's expecting us. Cole chuckled, shaking his head. This is insane. Miles climbed into the driver's seat. Damn right it is. The road to Valdez's compound was a stretch of asphalt leading into the heart of Cartel territory. Every block, every alley was another checkpoint, another pair of eyes watching them. But in the stolen Cartel vehicle, they moved undisturbed, passing guards without a second glance. Miles kept his hands steady on the wheel. The closer they got, the tighter his focus became. He had one shot at this, one chance to walk into Valdez's home and put him in the dirt where he belonged. Harper loaded a fresh magazine into her rifle. Once we're inside, we'll have seconds before they realize what's happening. Cole checked his sidearm. Make 'em count. The compound came into view. High walls, guard towers, armed men patrolling the perimeter. Floodlights cut through the night, illuminating the vast courtyard beyond the gates. Valdez was inside, waiting. Miles tightened his grip on the wheel. No hesitation, no second thoughts. This was what he had come for. He floored the gas. The car surged forward, tires squealing as they hit the checkpoint at full speed. The guards barely had time to react before the vehicle plowed through the gates, shattering metal and sending bodies flying. Gunfire erupted. Harper threw the door open and returned fire immediately, dropping a guard on the second-floor balcony. Cole rolled out, tossing a grenade that landed near a cluster of Cartel soldiers. The explosion ripped through the courtyard, sending flames into the night sky. Miles stepped out last, rifle up, heart steady. He locked eyes with Valdez, standing on the balcony above, watching the chaos unfold below him. The Cartel boss smirked. "You finally made it." Miles raised his rifle and fired. The first shot cracked through the night, splitting the air like a thunderclap. Miles Carter had lined up his rifle with precise military precision, aiming straight for Valdez's chest. But the Cartel boss was already ducking back behind cover, his smug smirk vanishing as the bullet shattered the concrete railing where he had just been standing. Gunfire erupted from every direction. The compound came alive in an instant. Floodlights slicing through the darkness, men shouting orders in Spanish, boots pounding against the pavement as reinforcements flooded in from every entrance. Miles didn't waste a second. He dropped to one knee, sighted the nearest gunman running toward the main courtyard, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet caught him in the throat, his body collapsing in a heap as blood sprayed against the wall behind him. Harper moved fast, her rifle up, firing in bursts as she sprinted toward a stack of shipping crates for cover. Cole was already laying down suppressing fire, his rounds punching through a parked SUV, where two Cartel gunmen had taken position. The first man jerked back, dead before he hit the ground. The second scrambling away as bullets shredded the tires. They were pinned down. Miles scanned the courtyard, spotting the reinforcements flooding through a side entrance. He grabbed a fragmentation grenade from his vest, pulled the pin with his teeth, and hurled it toward the doorway. The explosion rocked the compound, sending chunks of concrete and smoke into the air, the force of it throwing two men backward like rag dolls. More gunmen poured out from the main house, automatic rifles flashing as they unloaded everything they had. Miles ducked behind a marble fountain as bullets ripped through the stone, sending shards flying past his face. He heard Harper curse over the radio. "They're flanking left. We need to move." Miles popped up just enough to fire another round, hitting a gunman in the chest, sending him spinning. He made eye contact with Harper across the chaos, nodding once before sprinting toward the left side of the courtyard, weaving between overturned furniture and burning debris. Cole followed, covering them with wild shotgun blasts that echoed through the night. They reached the base of the main house just as another explosion rocked the compound. Miles didn't look back. He could smell burning oil and charred flesh. The fight wasn't over yet. They needed to get inside. Miles kicked the door open and swept the hallway with his rifle. The interior of the compound was lavish, gold fixtures, paintings of Cartel leaders past, a floor made of polished marble, a palace built from blood money. Harper moved in first, hugging the right side of the hallway. Cole took the left. Miles took point, pushing deeper into the mansion, keeping his rifle up. Footsteps echoed from above. Miles turned just in time to see a gunman on the balcony raising an SMG. He barely had time to aim before Harper fired. the round snapping through the man's skull, sending him flipping over the railing. His body hit the floor with a sickening crunch. Cole grunted. "Damn, Harper. Remind me not to piss you off." Harper smirked. "Stay on my good side, and you'll be fine." A door at the end of the hallway burst open. More gunmen spilled out, firing blindly down the corridor. Bullets shredded the walls, ripping through the ornate furniture like paper. Miles dove behind an overturned table, his back slamming against the hardwood. "We don't have time for this," he muttered. Harper reloaded. "Then let's clear them fast." Miles reached into his belt, pulled out a flashbang, and lobbed it toward the gunman. The explosion of blinding light and deafening sound sent them reeling, hands clutching at their eyes. Miles didn't hesitate. He pushed forward, firing 3 precise shots. The first gunman fell against the doorframe. The second dropped to his knees, blood pooling beneath him. The last one stumbled, disoriented. Harper finished him with a round to the chest. Cole stepped over the bodies. "That's one way to clear a room." Miles barely heard him. His focus was on the grand staircase leading up to the second floor, where Valdez was waiting. "This is it," Miles said, reloading. "We end this now." They moved up the stairs fast, rifles sweeping the halls. The upper floor was eerily quiet, the walls lined with expensive art and mounted animal heads. Miles took point, leading them toward a pair of massive double doors at the end of the hallway. Behind those doors was Valdez. They all knew it. Miles reached for the handle, then stopped. Something was off. Harper's eyes narrowed. "Trap?" Miles nodded. "Definitely a trap." Cole grinned. "Good thing I brought a present." He pulled out a breaching charge, set it against the hinges, and motioned for everyone to step back. Miles and Harper took cover behind a massive bookcase. Cole detonated the charge, and the doors exploded inward, sending shards of wood flying into the room. Gunfire immediately erupted. Miles rolled inside, moving low, taking quick shots at the men stationed inside. Valdez's personal guards, better trained, better equipped, but not good enough. Harper fired from behind cover, dropping one of the guards as he reloaded. Cole took another down with a shotgun blast to the chest. And then, standing at the far end of the room, gun in hand, dressed in a tailored black suit, was Valdez, the king. Valdez smirked, raising a pistol toward Miles. "You came all this way to die, gringo." Miles took a slow step forward, his rifle trained on Valdez's head. "Number, I came to bury you." Valdez pulled the trigger. Miles moved fast, dodging left, returning fire. The round missed his head by inches, but his own shot found its mark, tearing through Valdez's shoulder. The cartel boss staggered back, gripping the wound, cursing in Spanish. Valdez lunged behind his desk, flipping it over for cover. He fired again, wild shots, desperation setting in. Miles advanced, his pulse steady, his movements precise. He dodged another shot, rolled forward, and before Valdez could react, he was on him. He grabbed the cartel boss by the wrist, twisting the gun free, slamming his knee into Valdez's ribs. The man gasped in pain, struggling, but Miles was stronger. Valdez reached for a knife. Miles caught his wrist, snapped it. The bone shattered with a sickening crack. Valdez screamed. Miles didn't hesitate. He slammed the man onto the desk, pinning him down, pressing his sidearm to his forehead. Valdez's breath came in ragged gasps. "You kill me. Another will take my place." Miles gritted his teeth. "Let them try." He pulled the trigger. Valdez's body went limp, blood pooling across the polished wood. Silence. Harper lowered her rifle. "It's done." Cole stepped forward, nodding. "Damn right it is." Miles took a slow breath, stepping back from the desk. His hands were steady, his heart rate calm. It was over. They had done what the government never could. Valdez was dead. Now, the real work began, cleaning up the rest of his empire. But for now, Miles Carter was still standing, and the war was finally over. The end.